Hey everyone, Mr. Tweet here to talk to you about inflation. Just real briefly, inflation is when your currency is losing value, when your currency doesn't buy as much as it used to. Now, inflation is kind of hard for us to see because just because we see prices go up doesn't mean that it's inflation. It has to be kind of like the average prices that are going up for us to have inflation. In the United States, on average, prices go up about like 1 to 2% a year for the last couple of decades. So not a whole lot of inflation, but some. In other times and places in the world, we've seen much more extreme inflation. So like one of the classic examples would be Germany after World War I. I have here, this is a 100,000 mark note from 1923. This was actually early in the year, February of 1923, 100,000 marks. And you can see the other side there. This by September, here you have a 50 million mark note because the value of marks was falling so fast that they had to print more and more and more of them for people to be able to use. In fact, they were printing them so fast by the end of 1923 that the back of their money was blank because they weren't even taking the time to print both sides. They were printing so much money so fast. Now, as you can imagine, it makes life totally crazy when you have a really high inflation like that. We call that hyperinflation, when it's over 100% a year and prices are doubling, from one year to the next. We call that hyperinflation. At some points, like in Germany or in Zimbabwe, about 13 years ago, this was, $1 in 2007 Zimbabwe. Maybe this would buy you like a soda, something like that, Coke in 2007. By 2008, you have a $50 trillion note. Prices were doubling almost every single day in Zimbabwe. So what would cost you $1 on January 1st would then be $2, then $4, then $8, then $16, and it just keeps growing and growing and growing. When that happens, when you have high inflation, it does a couple of things. The first thing is that all inflation punishes people who save money. And so you don't want to have high inflation in an economy because if you're punishing people who save, it's not going to lead to long-term growth in your economy. When you have really high inflation, it makes life completely chaotic. There were, like in Weimar, Germany, people would renegotiate their wages in the morning when they go to work, and then they'd get paid at lunch. And at lunch, they'd go spend their money because by the end of the day, the money they earned in the morning might be worthless. So they would have to renegotiate their wages again after lunch, and then they'd get paid it for another few hours of work, and then they'd go spend it right away. So when you have really high inflation, what it does is it causes people to want to have stuff because stuff holds value, not money. So that money just becomes increasingly worthless. My favorite story from Weimar, Germany, they use these marks, Deutschmarks, for lots of different things. Sometimes they would use them to, like, instead of wallpaper because it was cheaper, they actually burned stacks of them because it was cheaper to burn stacks of money than to buy wood to burn. I mean, that's how insane is that? But that's, life in Weimar, Germany. My favorite story is this, it's probably not true. It's probably apocryphal, but there's a story about this old man who had been saving money his entire life at his house. And then when things were getting really chaotic in 1923, he got a wheelbarrow and he took all of the money that he had been saving in the floorboards of his house and he filled a wheelbarrow with it. He wheeled it down the street and he goes to a bank and his wheelbarrow won't fit in the door of the bank. So he looks down the street one way and he looks down the street the other way and there's nobody out there. And so he runs into the bank and he finds the bank manager and he's like, hey, can you help me, get my money? I want to put it in the bank because things are getting crazy. I'm afraid I'm going to lose it all. And so the bank manager and the man, they run outside the bank, and what do they find, right? You might think an empty wheelbarrow, but no, what they find is a pile of money. A thief has come along, and the thief didn't want to be slowed down by the worthless money, so he dumped out the money to steal the thing that was actually worth something, which was the wheelbarrow. So that shows you kind of how flipped upside down life gets when you have really high inflation. And so one of our economic goals is to try to keep prices stable. We don't want prices going down because that's a whole nother economic problem of deflation that we don't want. We don't want deflation, but we also don't want high inflation. We want to try to keep it around 1 or 2% a year. All right. So that's inflation. In the next section, I'm going to go over with you how we actually measure that. All right. See ya.